Hello, welcome to Dr. AI, the podcast. Rebuilding Medicine in the Age of AI. Trust by Design. Medicine has never been more intelligent. We can sequence DNA in days, replace joints with robotic precision, and detect disease before symptoms appear. Artificial intelligence now reads scans, drafts clinical notes, flags risk, and suggests treatment pathways. The capability is increasing almost weekly. And yet the experience of care feels unsettled and uncertain. Patients often feel processed rather than known. Clinicians feel responsible but constrained. Administrators defend financial survival. Technology companies promise efficiency while quietly reshaping workflow and decision-making. This is not a crisis of intelligence. It's a crisis of trust. And trust does not scale automatically. It has to be designed. Today, I want to offer a structure for doing that, not a slogan and not a technical upgrade, a way to think about medicine now that artificial intelligence is inside the room. The structure is simple, a triangle, 3 defined corners. If one weakens, the system tilts. If one dominates, confidence erodes. When the roles are clear and balanced, medicine works. Let's begin with the first corner, the health principle. For more than a century, we organized healthcare around the word patient, from the Latin patiens, one who suffers. It reflected the era of rescue in healthcare. Illness struck, intervention followed, but modern health is not primarily episodic rescue. It's a trajectory. Diabetes unfolds across decades. Depression weaves through seasons of life. Heart disease accumulates quietly. Aging is continuous. In this world, the individual is not simply receiving care. They are deciding. They are acting. They have agency. They decide whether to take the medications the doctors prescribe, whether to change their diet, as their health guru tells them, whether to accept surgical risk when it's been laid out clearly by the surgical team, whether to prioritize longevity or clarity of mind. They live with those consequences long after any appointment or encounter with the health system. But healthcare has treated people like a manufacturing process. In other words, in the system thinking of healthcare, humans are just a flow. They are optimized for throughput, just like manufacturing. The difference is that people are not raw materials. If you use aluminum in a manufacturing process, it doesn't decide anything. It just participates in its original elements. But people are not raw materials. They are actors. In governance, the principal is the party whose interests define the purpose of the enterprise and who ultimately bears the risk of its decisions. In health, that principle is the human being. The health principle is not placed beneath the system, nor protected passively at its center. They stand as a defined corner of the structure, the triangle of trust, because authority ultimately flows toward the person who bears the consequences. Trust begins when the system remembers who it is performing for. Culture is structure. Years ago, I drove 3 hours each way on Fridays to hold clinic on the Apache Reservation in Arizona. Some evenings, the waiting room was full. Other nights, it was nearly empty. Staff spoke of noncompliance, until we noticed a pattern. On nights when there was a home high school basketball game in Tuba City, the clinic was quiet. From an institutional perspective, appointments were missed. Marks were given to people who weren't reliable as patients. From the community's perspective, something else essential was happening. The game was a sense of belonging, community, continuity, identity. Choosing going to the game over your appointment was not irrational. It was culturally coherent. The chart marked a no-show. The community stood in solidarity to support their team. Health unfolds inside our identity as humans. When healthcare collides with belonging, it sends a message, and over time, people respond. But they do not abandon their community. They deprioritize the voice that misunderstands it. The health principle lives inside culture, not inside billing codes, not in hospitals, not in surgeries. If we misread that, the emphasis of culture on health, trust erodes. The second corner of the triangle is the clinician, the human health ally, not the lone authority of 20th century medicine, not the overextended functionary of the metrics era, but a professional redesigned around partnership. When I trained, medicine was very territorial. Referral streams were guarded, incentives rewarded volume, autonomy was prized above everything else. That culture didn't really arise from malice. It arose from design. Payment rewarded individual productivity, not team-based work. Authority followed billing. Over time, the structure tightened as physicians began to assert themselves not as doctors, but as entrepreneurs. Clinicians remained ethically and legally accountable for outcomes, yet their control over workflow began to narrow and finally to strangulate their sense of domain and their sense of agency in their own work. Electronic records dictated pace. You have 15 minutes to see this patient, to integrate all of the levels of culture and science that have to do with this individual, and then render some type of opinion. Electronic records that dictated that pace didn't include the complexity of the people we were trying to help. Insurers also constrained our options. Pharmacy benefit managers restricted medications, and high deductibles reshaped what could realistically be offered. Metrics multiplied, teams expanded, redistributing tasks without redistributing authority or clarifying whose authority it was. Responsibility remained, but authority was diffused. The result was confusion masquerading as collaboration. In the new construct of health, Health 4.0, it requires something quite different. The human health ally is not defined by a title, but by a function. An ally exercises accountable judgment in service of the health principle. Why teams? Because no single professional can steward the full arc of health. Prevention requires continuity. Prevention requires community. Proactive care requires surveillance. Chronic care requires coaching. Acute rescue requires technical expertise. Behavioral health requires trust. When you have cultural alignment, you introduce local understanding and community structure into medicine. Because modern medicine is too complex for an island, teams must be architected, not improvised. Roles need to be explicit, scope of practice clear, payment aligned with responsibility overall for the individual and their health. And that responsibility includes the individual who now has a much more deep understanding of their own autonomy in their health. Payment has to be aligned with all that, and accountability should be shared but not diluted. Technology can handle the data. Humans handle judgment. When alignment is correct, authority and responsibility travel together. When alignment is wrong, clinicians burn out and patients lose trust. Equal lines of a triangle, equal power in the relationship. This is a relationship worthy of trust. Finally, Dr. AI, the third corner of the triangle. Dr. AI represents scale and intelligence, a technology layer wrapped around the person who is the human principle. It integrates fragmented data. It goes back in time and can layer in the effect of where you lived when you were 5, your habits that you developed, the way you learn to eat, what you prefer, what your genes tell us, what your biology says, what the handwriting is on the wall, so to speak. It detects patterns that no single human can track, monitors trajectories over time continuously rather than episodically. It can determine when a change occurs. It can help you prevent disease and illness and stay in health. It can help you read the tea leaves of the future so that you can proactively move your health upstream. Let me tell you this story. A person told their concierge physician they had been brutally tired for days after waiting on the phone for hours to talk to him. Their oxygen level was 90%, resting heart rate 95, taken right off their watch. No fever, though, no cough. The physician said, "Come in on Monday and we'll take a look at you." The person, the human principle, typed the same symptoms into ChatGPT. It suggested there is a problem and advised going to the emergency room. Now, they went. The emergency room confirmed that the person had pneumonia on Friday, not waiting to be seen till Monday. Now, what do we do with that story? It is tempting to declare victory for artificial intelligence, but that misses the whole structural question of where the machine belongs in the triangle of trust. The machine doesn't have any legal responsibility, so it doesn't have any malpractice risk. So that part of it is really not on the table here. It did not see the patient. It did not auscultate lungs. It relied on the watch to tell it that the patient had, in fact, a lower than normal oxygen level and a higher than normal heart rate. It offered probabilistic pattern recognition, and the individual acted on its recommendation. The clinician, however, remained accountable for the health, but the lines were not well defined. This is the first time in medical history that clinical influence is scaling faster than human accountability. When influence moves faster than governments, trust shifts, even when no one announces it. In fact, that person later said, "I'll try ChatGPT first next time. It will save me a call." That is the instability that we are currently living inside. AI's capacity is extraordinary. Every day, more people turn to it to ask it questions that it can find the answers to in seconds. Yes, sometimes it's inaccurate. Sometimes our ability to prompt it to the most efficient and effective answer is not good. But it optimizes according to its design. It does not possess values. It does not absorb grief. It does not live with regret. Governance isn't optional. We need to establish it. AI must be transparent about what it does and does not know. Its limitations visible. Its incentives legible. The boundary between assistance and authority explicit. Autonomy matters. People are going to ask questions, and they should be able to. There should not be undue restriction or unusable friction in a person accessing an intelligence layer to help answer questions that they have about their health. So the goal is not to restrict inquiry, but to clarify responsibility. Introduce powerful automation into a fragile system without defining roles, and you do not get innovation, you get instability. And that is something of the echo that you hear online and everywhere about how trustworthy Dr. AI is. Properly placed, AI does not diminish the clinician. It expands what is possible. It reduces cognitive overload. It surfaces invisible risk. It allows humans to function, to focus on judgment, relationship, and meaning, rather than data retrieval. Artificial intelligence entered medicine quietly, not as a visible authority, but as an ambient presence, listening, transcribing, flagging risks, surfacing recommendations. It carries no license or legal responsibility, yet it shapes workflow and attention. Inference is its domain, and without accountability, it could cause destabilization of a system. But accountability without meaningful authority erodes morale. So the triangle clarifies all of these lines. The human health ally exercises accountable judgment. The human principle bears the risk. Artificial intelligence informs within the limits of its prompt. The distribution is not equal because the clinician has to stand behind the judgment, but it's the individual human who carries all of the risk because it is their health and their life that is at stake. Today, power is accumulating invisibly inside tools that carry no responsibility for outcomes. And that may not be the wrong answer. Trust does not require identical roles. What it requires is clarity about power, authority, and consequence. When the lines are defined, the system stabilizes. Equal lines, equal power, a relationship worthy of trust. What trust is. We often think of trust as a warm, lovely picture with perfect light of a peaceful setting, that somehow communicates trust to us. But trust is not warmth, and it is not branding. It's clarity in structure. It is the confidence that power, responsibility, and purpose remain aligned, especially under pressure. It is the assurance that the person who bears the risk is not overridden by the person who holds the tools. Rebuilding medicine in the age of AI is not about resisting technology. It's about defining its place correctly. The triangle of trust is not a slogan. It is architecture. Simple, stable, fair. It is trust by design. Thank you for listening to Dr. AI, the podcast. See you next time.